Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on getting started with mapping. So I'm Kath Priest. I'm an education and product support specialist at SNOMED International. And Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Anna Højen, and I'm a colleague of Kath. I'm in a different team, it's the implementation support team, but essentially implementation, education, they go along very well. Yeah.
And was a member of the education team before going to implementation, so knows a lot. Okay, so this is obviously a tutorial on getting started with mapping. I think Anna and I were chatting last night and we were sort of like, well, has anybody actually got any experience of mapping? Should we ask that question? So I am going to ask that question. Has anyone in the room had any experience of mapping to SNOMED? Okay, so we've got a couple of people. Yeah, some waving hands. So hopefully they'll just reiterate what you've already know and done.
And just so when we go through this and Kath is going through all the material, please just raise your hand if you have a comment to make based on your experience or if you want to discuss anything. I think it's important for this session to be fruitful for you that you can just raise your hand and let us know if you have anything you want us to elaborate or discuss.
Yeah, there's a Q&A mic there, so if you do have anything, just make your way to there and we'll know you want to ask us something. Okay. And for those of you online as well, there's a Q&A box too, so you can post your questions in there and either Anna or I'll keep an eye on that question too. Okay, so let's get started with getting started with mapping. Okay, so the outline of this tutorial is we're going to go through an introduction to SNOMED CT mapping, the key reasons for mapping and mapping process and tools, and then any considerations. So the mapping process and tools as well, we'll actually do some demonstrations of one of the mapping tools that we use at SNOMED International, or that you can use. Okay, so introduction to SNOMED CT. So why do we need maps? So this for me is just trying to demonstrate a patient's journey through the many different departments they might go through when they're visiting hospital. And each of those departments might have a local code system, or they'll record their information, or they might have domain-specific codes. So you might have oncology or dentistry, anything like that, that all have different ways of recording information. And they might be particular standards as well. And then you've got standards like classification systems that might be used for sort of billing, reporting and things like that. So this just kind of shows that sometimes a map is needed. I know we were in a session yesterday and they were talking about just using maps to migrate to SNOMED CT, but sometimes when there's lots of different things going on, sometimes a map is used, and mapping to SNOMED kind of creates that harmony between these different systems that are there. Okay. So what is mapping? So the main thing that you want to do when you first sort of mapping is you want to define a map. So you want to think about your use case and what it is. You want to then think about alignment. So it's always determining that link between codes in two different systems and how they align in meaning. But one thing to remember with mapping is that it's not patient encounter specific. So it doesn't relate to a particular patient event in there. So even though I showed you that patient journey of everybody going through, it's not related to that one event. It's just more linking the two code systems. And these maps, they are generally created with a specific purpose in mind. And that means you might have multiple use cases for a map between two codes that are the same, but they're actually used for different reasons. Okay. Now, when you're getting started with mapping, we often know people will use spreadsheets. Okay. That's just one of the things that people go to easily. Spreadsheets do sometimes cause bit of a problem. So you've got human error, copy and paste errors can lead to inaccurate documentation and inconsistencies. We know SNOMED CT codes don't always sit great in spreadsheets. So there's often errors in what the codes actually mean. There's also maintenance challenges when you come to use spreadsheets. So how do you sort with new versions of the different terminologies? How do you keep track of any changes that happen over time? And also, how do you, who are creating the maps, collaborate to be able to work and discuss the map that's done? Do you agree with it, don't you? These are all sorts of things that are tricky. And also, what's the source of truth? Do you end up with multiple versions of the map in different spreadsheets? And I think one of the things that we'll go through in this tutorial is a demonstration of the Snap to SNOMED mapping tool, which can help sort of streamline these things. And it is something that everyone can sort of use to be able to manage and maintain their maps. So we'll go through that as well as part of this tutorial. But really, now we're just covering kind of the theory of getting started with mapping. And then Anna will come in and do the demonstrations. Okay, so what are the key reasons for mapping? So generally, it's between SNOMED CT. In this instance, we're doing SNOMED CT in another code system. So it might be for migration. You're moving from an old clinical electronic health record to a new system. It might be for data entry. So you might want to map an interface terminology to SNOMED CT. It might be for reporting and analytics. It might be for knowledge linkage and interoperability. So we're just going to cover these reasons now quite briefly. So migration. So this might be a simple map from the local code system you've got in your old system, and you want to map and link the old code value sets to SNOMED CT. So this creates a starting point for new SNOMED CT value sets. So you might be able to expand on the content in there, depending on with the content that's in SNOMED. And also, you might map all patient records as well. So these might be mapped to SNOMED CT to help with any further reuse of that data. But you also want to always keep the original code. That's always best practice, that you've got that information. So you've always got that old patient information, the patient records available. So the other thing is mapping code system for data entry. So you'll have your local code system, which you might then map to SNOMED CT. So this is using the existing interface terminology that you have that enables that to be retained. But then you can map that to SNOMED CT and use SNOMED CT features, for whether that's for indexing information, for retrieval, for your analytics. And that would be through sort of links within a via terminology server. And then we've got data entry for your user interface. So this is more when you've got a fixed user interface. So you can see in this example, we've got sort of a section which you might want to have a physical examination of the head, the ear, the eye, and you can map those kind of the meaning in the information model of your system to SNOMED CT. So like head would go to head finding in SNOMED, or ear. And the other thing is, in terms of, you might have some original local code system codes, like allergy to nut, for example. So this you could potentially map to the allergy to nut in SNOMED. But you might actually think, oh, in SNOMED there are a lot more codes. So you can actually run that SNOMED expression constraint language query where you find all the subtypes of allergy to nut, and you can check if there's any overlaps of content that you've already got, but also check for any missing clinical concepts that are in your new code system. Now, Anna, we were discussing this, and I just want to check if I missed anything else when we were covering that. Okay. So this was a kind of a new thing that we want to make sure that you're getting that coverage of all the clinical concepts that you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one point to make there is often you think about mapping is like you want a one-to-one map. So if we look at a mapping, that is very often the case. But if it's part of migration and you actually want to utilize all the detail in SNOMED, what Kath is showing you here, that you actually also look in the browser and look in SNOMED CT to see if that can actually add some accuracy to your clinical documentation. I think that's an important point. But it does depend on the use case.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it also might be used for reporting and analytics. So this is just kind of, it's a picture of our map demonstrator really that shows how you would search for your SNOMED CT codes, and it can map to your classification systems to help with any reporting, analytics, reimbursement, things like that. So it shows you that your SNOMED CT code would map to ICD-10, and then that gives you an idea of what that map target code might be in ICD-10. So often we will use that for other code systems. And then also for reporting and analytics, so mapping data received from other systems. So you might get information from local code systems that you think from there, and you might want to map that to SNOMED CT, which is in your EHR. So then you can still use that data for analytics and clinical research using the features of SNOMED CT. Yeah, and the same with sort of knowledge linkage as well. So this often thinks about clinical decision support systems. And often clinical decision support systems will have that integration with SNOMED CT. But if they don't, sometimes they might need that map of the knowledge linkage, must be mapped from the knowledge resource to SNOMED CT to utilize the clinical decision support for people. Okay. And then interoperability. So we talked a little bit about that in terms of when you're getting things into a system that might be other local code systems that have been used, but that can be either way. It can be inbound or outbound data that you're receiving. You might want to map from one way to the other depending on what you're wanting to use that for. Okay. So now we're going through to the mapping process and tools. Okay. So this is just a general overall mapping process. And the first question you're always going to want to ask is a map needed? Okay, so are there other options? What's the use case for your map? What might you need? Is it for billing purposes? What's the clinical requirement? What do you need the map for? You will then want to specify the requirements for your map once you've decided you are going to use a map. What are the rules and requirements about the map? You then go and develop your map and review what you're creating. So you select concepts or codes, consider the approaches that you might use for authoring and reviewing maps. And then you'll use the map. So you want to distribute, integrate, deploy the map. And you want to maintain and update the map. So this is the process that we're now going to go through. So we'll take each individual process now in the tutorial. So we've got, is a map needed? So these are sometimes the kind of questions you can ask. So the considerations that help you decide whether you need a map. So what is the main purpose of the map? Who is the intended audience for the map? What is the scope of the content? Who is responsible for developing and maintaining the map? And how will the map be implemented? So here we've used an example for migration. So one of the key things, map to migrate, that I learned yesterday. So if we answer the first question when we're thinking about this migration example is, so what is the purpose of the map? So to enable interoperability and accurate data entry by converting local allergy reaction codes to SNOMED CT codes within the hospital's electronic health record system. So it's a specific purpose that you're wanting to create that map for. And then who is the intended audience? So we then think about, right, who's going to use the map? So healthcare providers, clinical informaticians, IT staff within the hospital, they're all the people who are going to be involved in utilising the map. So what is the scope of the content? So source is the local allergy reaction codes used in the hospital's legacy allergy records. So that's our first starting point that you're thinking about here. And then the target code will be SNOMED CT, so the clinical finding codes related to allergy reactions. And then who is responsible for developing and maintaining the map? A very key thing to always think about who you might need involved in the processes for maintaining the map. So here, the suggestion for this example that this hospital has gone through is that they want a team of clinical informaticians, allergists, and the IT staff working on this configuration in the EHR. And if possible, they can get a terminologist in as well to help them decide on that map. And then we're looking at how will the map be implemented. So the map codes integrated into the hospital's EHR system. Training sessions will be conducted for healthcare providers when they update with the updated coding system, and then ongoing support and regular updates will be provided. So this kind of gives you a real consideration of the process that might be involved in just deciding whether you're going to use a map or not. And it's always with having those plans of what you're going to do. So now we move on to the yellow arrow, the specify requirements, so mapping rules and requirements. So one of the first things you want to think of is what's the scope of the map? So what's the inclusion criteria and the documentation surrounding the scope? Oh gosh, this is really slow, I'm really sorry. So you want to think about the map direction. So will the map be bi-directional, unidirectional? What's your approach to selecting concepts? Approach to handling sort of inexact matches. So if you're mapping from the source code system, how do you manage if you don't find something in the target system that you're using? And then the approach to any missing target code. So if there's not one that exists, how are you going to use that? And how might you use synonyms as well? And this is often key in terms of mapping with other languages. You want to make sure you've got enough synonyms, or if you're using a particular edition, you might want to make sure that there might only be one. Say you're using the Danish extension. This is the kind of example that I can think of. And in the Danish edition, they've only got, say, one synonym to a code, but in your local code, you've got lots of different ways to thinking about that. So it's thinking about what you might find in the extension and edition that you're using. Okay. So this is the map direction. So that was on one of the first things that you might think about. So it can be just unidirectional. It goes from one code system to another, and that can be in either direction. So for example, it could be from SNOMED CT to say Medra, but then you might have Medra to SNOMED CT. It can be either direction. You might have, yep, so that's just saying that source to target code there. And then it might be, bi-directional. And I would say it's more common to use a unidirectional map. That tends to be the way that things, and they don't tend to be reversed. It's very unusual, isn't it, for bi-directional maps to be used. Yeah, please do.
And it's real. This is a really important point that there is a direction, and it has to do with patient safety. It has to do with reimbursement or whatever you're using your map for. That if you're starting to use a map in a different direction, and let's say you have a one-to-many, we'll talk about correlation soon. If you have one code in one system that maps to many codes in another code system, then you can't just go in, or let's say the other one, if you have multiple codes that map to one code in the other code system. So if you suddenly want to go in the other direction and you don't have any contextual information, you can't pick between all the other codes. And if these are the ones that you're using for reporting, then you are in a bad position. And if it's used for analytics, clinical decision support, then it suddenly impacts patient safety. So you should always document the direction of your map and make sure that the users of the map understand this, the implications.
Yeah, and I think we did the introduction to tutorial earlier this morning, and one of the questions there was about mapping was, can you use the maps in reverse? You know, so, and this is why you need to be really clear for people of which way you use your maps. Okay, so this is what Anna was saying about in terms of the map patterns, which way you can go. So you can have lots. You can have the one-to-one, where you say one source code is mapped to another, one-to-many, many-to-one, one-to-none, many-to-many. So if we have a look at this example, you've got one code system to another, which might be your SNOMED ulcer of foot, goes to foot ulcer in Medra. But then this is when you might have a one-to-many. So we've got blister of ankle with infection in SNOMED CT, but that can go to many ICD-10 codes. To be able to record that same level of information, you've got that one-to-many map. And this is why it is kind of important of deciding what you need to do and what the purpose of your map is, like Anna said. And then we've got the correlations as well, which she then went on to describe in terms of if it's that one-to-one map, is it an equivalent map? So do they mean exactly the same thing? Or is it that it's broader? So you've gone from one code system, like for example, the SNOMED CT to ICD-10, it's kind of more of a broader map that it doesn't always equal the same meaning. Or narrower, so you've gone from something a bit more broader that goes to something narrower. I'm going to go through an example of that next, so I'm just going to skip over that now. And then we've got an inexact match or no match or unmatched. So these are all kind of relationship types that can be used when you're creating a map. So when it comes to SNOMED CT, these are the relationship types that we can use. Okay, so this is an example of your broad to narrow map. So this is where you've got kind of a more coarse-grained meaning concept to a sort of finer grain one. So this would be an example if you've got pain and it's then mapped to headache. Okay, and that would be the SNOMED CT concept that you would use to sort of record that correlation of that map as you're creating your map as you go. And this, Anna will demonstrate this as well in the mapping tool when we get to that point. And this is kind of indicates of how, what Anna was saying, if you've got a broad to narrow map, how that may result in sort of inaccurate retrieval of content. So if you've got a record where someone is, they've selected diabetes in the record, but there's a map behind it that actually points it to diabetes type 1. So that might mean anyone with diabetes type 2 is also included in the statistics of those with diabetes type 1 because the map has gone from a broad to narrow map, because clinicians might be using the diabetes mellitus concept to record patients with diabetes mellitus type 2. Yeah.
So what we're essentially saying, you really, really need to be clear on your use case if you allow broad to narrow maps, a lot more than if you go from the narrow to broad map, because there at least you're not adding any unintended semantics as part of your map, because you just go to something that is more coarse-grained, so that it's not wrong, it's just not precise. If so, that's the advice in general.
Yeah, because you don't want to clump those patients together when clinically they might be treated completely different. And then this is the example that we've got that it's the opposite way, so you narrow to broad map. So this will then impact sort of the information that you can retrieve about however many patients you might have with a certain condition. If you've got diabetes mellitus type 1 and diabetes mellitus type 2 mapped to the overarching sort of diabetes mellitus concept. Okay, so now I just thought we kind of think about a mapping scenario in terms of we're migrating from an old system to a new system. We've got a problem list here of certain local codes, local terms that have been used. So we've got rheumatoid arthritis, we've got CAPD, heart attack, pulmonary embolism. So we need to think about, right, well, what direction will this map be? So if you're moving from a local code system to SNOMED CT, that's the direction of the map we would expect this to be in. And then we want to think about, will this map be a one-to-one or one-to-many map? So this is, again, thinking about what content you've got, what information is there. You need to think about that direction and what you might use and document the reasoning for that map. And then we've got, so now we know that these are a problem list. These codes relate to diagnoses. So what part of SNOMED CT do I use? So in this case, we're likely to use the clinical finding hierarchy to be able to map these concepts. And then the other question is often that we need to make sure people consider is how do we manage context that's included in our local code system? So as you can see from here, we've got hypertension or history of hypertension in that list. So this might depend on your information model in your clinical system. You can see here there's 3 examples. So you've got the patient history, which might mean a history of hypertension. You've got a current diagnosis of hypertension, or you've got a family history. So which way, what do you do? Do you want to be able to create a map where you're creating specific history, pre-coordinated SNOMED CT concepts, or are you going to use just the disorder codes from there? Got Jonathan? Come.
I'm the kind of person who always just have a remark,
No,
sorry.
good.
But I think this point, based on my experience, it's a good place to actually also if you are leading a project where you're mapping, it's okay to question. So if you're mapping a local code set that has been used by physicians for some years, it is actually okay. You come in with the new eyes and look at this, And if you are aware of things that are now in the new terminology that you're going to use, to actually ask them what they understand with that concept, because we are many heads here, and every time we hear a word, we hear something specific. So this kind of mapping project is a very good opportunity to have that talk about, is that needed? Would it be okay if that was split into two? Sometimes in local code system, you will have many instances of this and this, or this or this. Is it okay to actually split things up, to have a new set, which is even more unambiguous? So I just want to say that based on my experience, and I'm thinking particularly of a project we did in Denmark with nursing, we had a very good conversation because we were mapping about what they meant and if there were opportunities to actually start splitting things up and doing it a bit differently. So, and that is an example of this as well. Context is very often in those legacy code systems.
Yeah, and this is where, in terms of SNOMED, we need to think about the hierarchies that you use as well, because these would potentially come from different ones. Well, they do come from different ones. Okay, so one of the key things, I think, like what Anna's just said, that described in a way what you've done with the Danish, with the nurses there, is that you want to clear your source code. So you want to have a look and think about, well, what do these actually mean? So before you even go into the process of mapping, you want to think about, you know, for example, the CAPD, well, what does that mean? So we've got here central auditory processing disorder, but it could also mean continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. So you need to clarify your abbreviations. What are you actually recording? So you want to avoid ambiguity, basically. That's the key tip here. Avoid it being ambiguous. Know what you're recording and what you're searching for. Also, we've got here left hip pain. Are we including laterality? Or again, is that going to be something that's managed in the information model? You know, do you want those pre-coordinated terms? So similar to like the history of, so are you providing context? And again, we've got PAA there, which is like popliteal artery aneurysm. So is this correct again? Could it be pulmonary artery aneurysm? So you need to have those sometimes discussions to clear up your original source codes to be able to then map them efficiently. Okay. You also need to think about what you might do with no maps and map relationships. So you want to aim for exact matches wherever you can. And if there's inexact matches, what are the ways you're going to manage this? What are the examples? So do you need to think about, do new concepts need to be you know, created? Can you contact your extension or SNOMED International to be able to add new content to help you with your map? Is it a gap in the terminology that needs to be filled? Or do you agree that you might select the nearest supertype for your map? And also, is it that you need to go back to the original source code again and review it and see what it actually means? Okay. And I think we've sort of covered what a narrow or broader map is, and this is where you need to really evaluate that clinical impact of which way you choose to go and the relevance of this and how it might impact the data that you want to retrieve for what you're going to use the map for. And then no map decisions. So this is when, if you can't find a map, you know, how are you going to manage these as well, in terms of, is it going to be recorded or mapped using the SNOMED CT concept that's available, or is it sort of a map that's there? Okay, and then you'll also want to periodically review your map as well, especially sort of the inexact and no map entries, to see if there's been any changes that you might want to add. Right, so then you also want to think about, how will you create the map? What tooling might you use? So obviously in this demonstration, we're going to use Snap to SNOMED CT, but there are other mapping tools out there that you might want to use to be able to create your maps. But also, what workflow are you going to use? So this goes back to like, what resources you've got available. Do you only have sort of one or two members of staff? So you might use a single author and a single reviewer, or you might have two. So with Snap to SNOMED, these are the features that will support you for mapping. So you can load a local code system into Snap to SNOMED. You can define the map scope and its dependencies, and Anna will go through this as she's creating the maps. It's got support for workflows and tasks, so you can have different authors and different reviewers to be able to help review and do that workflow, be able to have those discussions within the tool about what you think about maps. You can also map code by code, line by line in the map, but there's also an auto map function in the mapping tool as well. So it will analyze all the different codes and give suggestions from SNOMED CT. It also shows you the concept definitions of SNOMED. So that helps you with making that decision of if that's the right thing from what you think your source code means. It helps you gain that full understanding of what concept you're mapping to. There's also the different versions available in SNOMED CT of different editions of SNOMED that are available. So it helps you manage any sort of changes to the terminology. And you can export a map in different formats too. So this is just a brief workflow of how the single author, single reviewer process would work if you choose that. So this is where you enter your source code set, and each source code can be assigned to a single author mapper, and then each map row can be assigned to a single reviewer. Or you can have dual author with reconciliation. So this is where you might have two mappers that map the whole codes, map each code, and then you have to see if there's any difference between the maps. Then they will reconcile to see if they've agreed, that might be fine, and that you agree that's okay. But if there are any differences between the two mappers, then that kind of, the reconciler will look at those issues there. Okay, so now we've got the demo coming up. So Anna is going to show how we might use these methods to author a map. I'll leave that on that.
So in the past, we didn't support a mapping tool. We've known since we started working with SNOMED CT that mapping is a key thing for enabling it, because often it needs to go into systems that are already using something else. But when SNOMED International established the implementation support team, this was one of the key priorities for this team in order for us to be able to help you who are implementing SNOMED. So I really think you should embrace this tool and be aware that it exists, because it's your tool. It's really for you to get started on your implementation journey, and it supports all the things, features that Kath has just described. You enter the tool here in snap.snomedtools.org. So if you don't have access to it when you create your SNOMED account, please let us know. There's a feature where you can say, I need access to Snap to SNOMED for my mapping project, and then you'll have access to it. And this tool supports the mapping from local systems to SNOMED. It doesn't have the other direction at present, so just be aware that it's really designed for migration and getting started with implementation. And this is an example. It's some of the terms and codes that Kath was showing you before. I can just increase it a bit. So often you will have some local code and there will be a local term, but then you may, as Kath was just describing, may have done something to make some more appropriate terms. And I just want to make a statement about that. When you get to know SNOMED CT, terms will have a certain sound, right? Often the preferred term will be like disorder of some body structure, or it could be a fracture of body structure. So there is a certain pattern to some of the terms that you may see in the edition that you're working with. So I would recommend that when you have your local term, just have a skim into the browser. What is the way that SNOMED is articulating these types of terms, so that the source terms actually match as to a higher extent the terms that are used in SNOMED. And the reason It's not something you have to do, but when you'll see it when we go into the tool, it would actually help the automatic auto map feature to select better concepts. So that was just one thing. So let's say we have our local code system here. I've called it the problem list example. I'll go in my spreadsheet, I'll download it. I can choose either CSV or tab separated. So I'll just do that. So now it's stored. I have it over here. And then I'll jump into Snap to SNOMED. So I'm logging into the system. So the first thing you see, this is tiny for you. I'll just increase it a bit. Is it okay? Yeah? Okay, so what you'll see here is a set of maps. So this will be blank first time you go in there, unless someone has assigned you to something you didn't know. So each row is, you can say, a map project. So when you get started, you simply create a map. I'll just create this bigger again. And the first thing you have to do is to consider, what is the workflow? Are we a single author or a single reviewer? That doesn't mean you can't be more than two. It just means that for each of the codes in your code system, there will be one mapping it and one reviewing it. Or if you're working in the dual author mode, where you have different mappers working on the same codes and then a reconciler. So for this one, we'll just use the single author, single reviewer, but this is where you swap, and you have to decide it when you set it up. So we'll do the Expo demo. Then you give it a version, and you can give it whatever version you'd like. It's just a number. It's for your sake. You can provide a description. Just call it demo. Then you need to select your code set. So let's say I have been mapping the same code set, and the old code set has not changed. Then I could just select one that I've already had in my. But in this case, I'm selecting the one we just downloaded. And now I need to provide a name for that. It's my problem list. I'll say the source version. So this is the source version of my the source codes, not the map project, but the source code. So it may be you have a versioned approach, but now of your local code set. So maybe this is version 3.2, I don't know. So you could just enter that there. This depends on how you manage your local code sets. But this is the first one. If you know that you're going to export the result of this map into a FHIR concept map, and you know what URL of your terminology server, you can apply, or the URI of your terminology server and the value set, you can apply it here. You don't have to do that. If you're exporting to a SNOMED edition, this will not be relevant. So if you're using a terminology server, you might as well just put those URIs in here. That will ease the post-processing. So now I am selecting the file, the problem list example that I just created. So I have it here. Now I need to be familiar with, so let's go back. The first column I had was the local term, or local code. Then I had local term and source term. And it's actually this column here, source term, I want the system to use when mapping. This term is the one that the clinicians are familiar with and the actual point of departure. But it's this one over here that we have like prettified and prepared for mapping. And I need to know that because the order is different. Because what Snap to SNOMED does is actually guessing. Okay, I can get there was a term, there was a column with a code, so it guesses right that the local code is the one. But the local term is not what I want to use. It's the source term I want to use. But in the tool, I would actually still like to be able to see the local term. So therefore, I'm saying I want to add some additional source columns, and I want to import also the local term, because then it displays. If I didn't care about those local terms from now on, I could just leave them out. But you need to define which one is used as the term for mapping, and that will be the first one. And this is text. And now I'll save this. So that was the import step of the local code set. Now I define what am I mapping to, because it's not enough just to say I'm mapping to SNOMED. There can be a great difference if I'm mapping to the Canadian edition, because maybe there are some Canadian content in there. Maybe my local codes are written in Danish, and I'm mapping to the Danish edition, or I'm mapping to SNOMED, then I would choose the Danish edition because that's where the Danish terms are held, right? So you need to also think about this when you map. So what you can see here are various editions that are loaded into Snap to SNOMED here, and I'm picking the international edition. It lacks an icon. It's a pity. We will work on that. And now we are jumping in time, because now we're back in 2019. Because for the sake of the future demonstration, we are now pretending that we are in 2019. We have not moved to the point of actually maintaining this yet. This is the first time we do it, and let's pretend that we are back in 19 and we are using the July 2019 version of SNOMED CT. Okay? Of course, when you start a new project, you would use the latest version. But later we'll show how you maintain a map, and that's why we're now selecting a previous version. Okay? Then the domain. So again, similar to the edition, it's not enough to say I'm mapping to SNOMED. We are working on a problem list. We want to exclude anything that has to do with substances, body structures, procedures. We don't want to map to anything. And we want to help the ones who are mapping not to make mistakes in their map. So that's why we here select this predefined scope, which is any concept from the clinical findings hierarchy. What you will notice when you select a domain is that there is an ECL field down here. The expression constraint language, that's a tutorial, that's a topic for a separate tutorial, but essentially it's a language you use to say what SNOMED concepts you want to use. And in this case, we have selected the whole clinical finding hierarchy, but it may be that I was working with clinical findings minus all those clinical findings that were part of a certain sub-branch of the clinical finding hierarchy. So you can actually use the ECL to be very specific on the kinds of concepts in SNOMED CT you would like to use. So if these domains up here are not sufficient, you can apply a more tailored ECL down here. Yeah.
Just before you take an example with hypertension and story of hypertension, I think it's a situation.
Yeah.
And situation is not in clinical findings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hypertension is bad also.
I'll just say this for the sake of those who are online. The question here was, but now I'm selecting a scope which is outside the scope of one of the terms in my source set. And as you'll see, you can already guess if the system will find a match for that now. So, because you're right. But maybe you could then say, I want all the clinical findings and all the situations, but not the whole situation hierarchy, but only those situations that are called history of. So in that way, if you allow that, you can refine the ECL to also include that. So that would be the way to come around that, so that you don't get an error in the map or are not allowed to find the source code. Okay? If you have a spreadsheet at home where you have been sitting there, I've seen plenty of them where you have your local codes and then you have your SNOMED codes. And you're thinking, oh, but I want to use this now, but I have all of this in my spreadsheet. You can actually import a map that you have been working on, making sure that the structure of that spreadsheet you're working on have a local code, a local term, a SNOMED code, a SNOMED term. The SNOMED term is actually not important for the import. It's the SNOMED code that is important. But in the user guide, you'll see the format of the, if you have an existing map, how that should be structured, so that you can actually take what you have been working on today and then import it to start using this tool instead of your spreadsheet. So down here, you can select who has access to your map. And in this one, let's select Kath. That makes sense, right? And she's a member. An owner can do anything. An owner can create a new version, delete the map, everything. The member can author, so create the task that you'll see soon, and a reviewer can review. Guests can only view and look at what has been mapped to what. So it's if those who are actively involved in the map would be members. But sometimes you may want to allow people to go in and have a look, and they should be guests. So Kath, you will be a member. And then I click save, and then it loads. And now we are into Snap to SNOMED, and I'll just do it like this just for a second so that you can see my codes here have been imported, and I can see both of the terms. And the one that I have first is the one I had in my third column before. Okay, I'll make it bigger now. In order to get started, up here you see the version. We have this first version. In order to start working on the map, you need to create tasks. So you do that over here by clicking task. Yeah, I'll get in trouble for all this zooming. You can see. I'll go down again. I'm sorry. So here you can see there I can create a new task. If I go over here, you can see there's no authoring tasks at the moment. There are no reviewer tasks. So let's create a new one. I'm not giving it a description because there is a default, it does it automatically. I'll create the task for me. As you can see, I could also create it for Kath if I wanted her to do something here. And I'll select whether this is an author task or a reviewer task. I'll select author. If I wanted to say only map the first three myself and maybe let Kath do the rest, I could manually select the things over here to say these are the ones I want to map. But in this case, I just want to say everything goes for me, okay? For the sake of demonstration, but often you would split it up like between you. And I'll assign this to me. So now it's creating the task. And what you'll see here is that I have my task. Yeah, and now you can see it's created the author task. So let's close this. I'm still not in the task here, but if I go up here, if I had created a review task at the moment or at the same time, you could see that as well. But right now we have the task that we just created. It's the author task for all source items. So I jump into that, and you can see it now changes. Down here you still have the overview of the codes, and you can see that no target codes has been selected. So there are different ways that you can approach this when you start. If you just want to start here, you can do a search. You can actually drag things up to the search field. If I miss my mouse right now. Right up here, I'll drag that up. Fever symptoms, and there was a match. I'll click on it. I haven't selected it yet. When I click on the result here, you can see where it sits in the hierarchy. You can go up and have a look. And over here, I find this very useful, that you can actually go over and see how it's defined. And you can look at the various terms. Okay? So if I'm happy with this, from this, I can drag it down. I don't have long enough fingers. Here. And then you can see that the code is in the target code, and the target display will display the fully specified name. So in Denmark, we have not translated the fully specified name. So if I was in the Danish edition and looking at Danish terms, once I dragged it down, I would certainly see the English FSN, but that's because of the nature of how that edition looks. And in this case, I would say the relationship. So this is where we say, is this narrow to broad or broad to narrow or an exact? In this case, let's say it's an equivalent. That's the same as the exact. And let's just say that I've mapped this now. So this is the first approach. We have a details view, which is a bit better, because then it doesn't require you to do as much to do the searching. When I go into details view, it has taken the local term and it has done a search for that without us having to do anything. So it has a search for cough symptom. And then you can see down here, it suggests this, but there are also, there's actually only one match here. What would you say if I was picking this? Would it be an exact match, narrow to broad, broad to narrow? What does aggravates means? Worse. It irritates. Okay, so it's just inexact. It's not exactly the same, it's inexact. So you can do that. And then you can say, well, now this is maps, and then you can move on. So this is a faster way than the other way that we had out there. So you just move to the next, and you can work through your way through them. And now it has searched on rheumatoid arthritis, and we can then select this one. So that was the second way of using this. Let's go out again. I'll change the status to mapped. So the third way I want to show you is the auto map. So remember how I said that it's good to just streamline those terms and make sure that they sound a bit more like SNOMED than what they may have done. What I'll do is click on auto map up here, and then the system will take the source terms and match against any of the terms within the domain, within the edition that you have selected. So let's do that, auto map. Done, now it's completed 14 out of 15, it said, and now you can see it has suggested map targets for you. So this changes. So if you are only 2 in a mapping project, you actually have an extra hand here, because now the mapping or the author task is also about reviewing. So now you have a point of departure. It doesn't require you to go in and start, where do I have to look? But now you have a point of departure, and you can see if these are good concepts. You can see heart attack has been mapped to myocardial infarction. You can go into the details, and you can look at what is myocardial infarction that has been selected, what are the properties of that concept. On your screen, which are bigger, and when it's not zoomed, it's easier to see, I can promise you. But here, it will automatically put everything into an inexact. So that goes for everyone. It will make no judgment about what kind of map is this. Is this narrow, broad, equivalent? So you'll do that. So you can drag things up and down and wherever, okay? So now you can go through all the ones, but you have a better point of departure. You're just reviewing what it has done. And you can also do that out here. You can change if you want to just go through the list, because this is where this view actually becomes very efficient, because now you can just in this table go down and say inexact, broad to narrow, and so forth. This one, history of hypertension, what you said before, it's not included in there's no map for this. There's no history concepts or history of hypertension in the clinical findings hierarchy. So what you can do for a start, maybe in this case, is to give it a flag. It's a no map flag, so that if you have a team and you're discussing how far it goes and how well it goes in your project, then you have like, well, since last time have a no map flag for these concepts, and that's where you have to make the decisions that Kath was telling you about. Well, do we remove them from the list? Do we alter them? What do we do? Do we request them for inclusion, or do we expand the scope? So flag them as a no map and use that no map as a way for you to collect the ones that you need to discuss later. So now you can see I have all of these in draft. I'll just show you how to bulk edit and make them all mapped. I'll just click over here. It will select all my codes, and then I click bulk edit, and I change the status from either draft or not what it is to mapped. So now I have mapped all my codes. You can see they have changed the status to mapped. Is this how far the first part goes? I think it is, right? Good. Any questions while we swap? Then let us know.
I won't be long for this next bit. So this next bit we're going on to is just how, so once you've created your map, it's now how do you deploy that map? So you need to think about that. There's different ways that your maps can be deployed and integrated. So you can use a FHIR concept map, or it can be published within a SNOMED CT edition, or it can just use a traditional database table to be able to use your map that you've just created in, say, Snap to SNOMED. So the FHIR concept maps, they tend to have a standard format. that can be sort of have a fire package and used with a fire API, and they have quite a lot of metadata coverage and sort of safety features within that map to kind of make sure it's version content. There's a lot of metadata that's included about the map and where it is. You've then also that it can be actually used in a SNOMED CT edition. So once again, that's like a standard format. So that uses the release format too, that you would create it then into a reference set to be able to include it into a SNOMED CT edition. And that links onto a different presentation and a different tool that can be used to package that, but it means that it can then be used in a SNOMED-enabled tool and relates to that terminology content. And it also has some metadata coverage that tells you sort of the version and the different substrates that you're using for that map. Or there's the traditional database table. So this is obviously a really flexible way to deploy a map, but there is no standard formatting. So we always say kind of be careful if you are using that traditional database table. So you will need to document separately and record the map version that's used. You will need to kind of separately record the metadata and make sure that if there is any changes with the terminology, that you're keeping aligned with that one. So this is why this is going to be really quick, Anna, for you to then come and demonstrate how we can deploy this within in the Snap to SNOMED tool. So this kind of just gives you a bit of information on what to do when you're wanting to create that fire concept map. So this is what Anna showed you in the mapping tool when you first create your maps, that you set the source version, and this is where you can expand sort of the additional fire metadata in there. So you can see the example on the screen of the different sort of code system URI that you can use to be able to help that when you're importing your map source. So when you come to export the sort of fire concept map, there are some little tips as well that you need to consider, that there might be some manual changes that you need to make, that you need to change sort of the status to, you need to change that because obviously there you can see it's unknown on there, so you'll need to add what the status is. You need to set the map URL identifier and remove any terms from the target URI ECL as well. And then add the source code system, so if it's not already set. So these are just some little tweaks that need to be made if you're wanting to use the fire concept map export before you're putting that into your fire terminology server. Yeah, okay, so we're going to move on to now. You've deployed your map, so Anna will sort of show you how to do that, so I'm going to skip that slide. And then this is sort of the maintenance. So your map's been being used. You can see that we used the July 2019 version that you saw Anna create. And each version of a map is based on a particular substrate or version of SNOMED CT. And as you found out, SNOMED CT is updated every month. So there will be changes to content, there will be changes to terms. So there needs to be a way that you can maintain your map that you're creating. So you need to think about other ways as well. So there might be users who are using the map as well that might request changes to your map because there might be a gap or there might be something missing that they would find useful in their map. So you need to think about those kind of queries that might come in from users. There also might be system changes of where you're using your map. So there might be some, like for example, when we're talking about context or things like that, you might need to consider if there's a different change to the system, so you need to change the context of the map. Yep, and then the documentation, making sure that any of these reasons of why it might be need to be maintained, it is always documented. And then the new terminology version. So you might go to a new version of the international edition, and actually a concept's been inactivated, so it's no longer kind of there available in your map. So you need a mechanism of being able to do that. And that's one of the things that Snap to SNOMED does, is it can support the replacement for inactive concepts by using the historical associations that are part of SNOMED CT. So each time a concept is inactivated, it will be given an association to another concept. So whether it's the same as a different concept, or if it's ambiguous, it might be equivalent to two concepts. So in these historical associations, that's actually used by the mapping tool to present you with options to choose from, which Anna will now go through.
Yeah, and I must say, I'm super, super excited about this feature, the versioning feature. And that's one of the key things in terms of working with a spreadsheet and a dedicated mapping tool. Aside from it supports a lot easier to find the codes, but that you can actually just easily update to a new version. And you know where to find the last version, and you can actually go back in time and see how did it look years ago. So, and that's really why I would advocate that you start using a tool for your maps. Okay, so before showing you the versioning, I want to show you where you export. And you do that up here. So in the view map area of the tool, you can export, and there are different options: comma separated, tab separated, in an Excel, as a Fire concept map, and there is an extended one. And that's because I now remember that I failed to show you something before. I'll just show you that once I had mapped my codes, let me just create a review task as well. So I'll create a task for myself again. This is where I would definitely, if it was a real project, I would pick Kath or my other colleagues, because I wouldn't want to review what I have done myself. But we have actually allowed that in the system, primarily for the case of demonstrations. And you will also see that if you assign yourself as a reviewer to something that you have mapped yourself, it will give you a warning, because this is not good practice. But this is like a gateway for me, so that I can now show you that I'm creating my review task. And it appears in my list. So when I go into review mode, you see all the ones that are mapped. If there were some that were in draft in the author task, the mapper can't see them. So the reviewer can't see them. The reviewer can see the things that have a status of mapped. Okay? And so now I can go in again, I can look at these concepts, and I can say, so this person who mapped this mapped fever symptoms to, or mapped the concept fever symptom to this SNOMED concept fever symptoms. I accept that, I agree with it. If you reject it, then you can also add a note. You can also add a note if you agree. But you can add note here to say, did you consider this concept? I have doubt. Or you can use these notes simply to communicate with the people in your team. And that leads me back to the export, because the export extended version is the one that includes all the notes. So if you have been communicating a lot back and forward about things, if you just do some of these exports, it will exclude all the notes, but the extended one will include them. And sometimes it's nice to have that in a paper instead of going into the tool. It depends on how you work. Okay, so you can do that, and you'll see here that if we, for example, did the JSON version, I'll just go here. I'll show this in my... So you see this is a format, the JSON format, that you can load into your Fire terminology server, and then it will understand that as a Fire concept map. But it could also just be in Excel, and then you would see, let me just do it so you know what you see. Export to Excel. I wonder how long this will take, loading my Excel here. There. What you essentially get here is similar to the table you have in the tool, where you see the source, target, also the relationships, and the no map and the status, all the things you saw in the table in the tool. You see that here as well. Good. Now, So that was about export. Now we are back in 2025. So now we want a new version of our map. So the way to do that is to go to the front page, find the project, and click on New Version. Often this will also involve loading a new version of your source code set. We are not going to do that, create a new version. So we're going to just use the one we had before. And sometimes you may not need to load a new version, because maybe it's just because SNOMED has been updated so many times and now you want to keep track. So your source has not changed, but SNOMED has. So now we'll pick the international edition, but now we'll go to the October 25 version of the international edition. So we're jumping 5 years. There's been so many releases of SNOMED CT in this time. The scope has not changed. I could change the scope, for example, to include the situations if I wanted. I'll just click Save. So now it's creating a new version, and you can see up here that I'm now in version 2, but I can easily jump to version 1 if I wanted to look at what did it look like. So here in version 2, we now see the tags here. There are some exclamation marks, and it goes crazy down here. It's funny enough that we have added these at the end, right? Because we were preparing a good example, so they came in at the end. But this is to show you, this is what happens when there is something wrong in terms of the sources of your map and the edition that you're working on. So when I hover over here, you can see that the target, so this one, is now out of scope of the map target scope. So let us create a task for me to look at, resolve some of this. I'll assign this to myself. I'm creating this. Don't know why it's at 17. Let's see, maybe it's because of the no map, not sure. So I'll select my author task, and we will, oh, it didn't actually do the first one. Include that. We'll go down here to some of these. If I'm just happy with all of these, you're likely to be, right? That you have mapped them one, you don't want to spend time now because we're doing an upgrade. You want to focus on there where there is a tag. So I'll go in here, and what you can see is now that this code here, there's something wrong with that. The target is out of scope. I can click to find replacements. In this case, nothing happens. And this is a special case, and that's because all of these concepts in SNOMED has actually been moved to the UK edition. So there is no replacement in the international edition. So in that case, you'll now see that the hover over feedback has changed. No active in-scope replacement suggested. So what you would do in that case, what was the concept? On examination, hernia. Maybe I just want to map to hernia then. And then I can start to actually go over here and say, I don't, this up on examination, I don't want that. But then I can do a search, a broader search for hernia, intestinal hernia, for example. I say, this is the one I want to use instead. I can drag it over. Come on. Let me delete this. Don't want this anymore. I don't know if it works if I do this. I can also do it from up here. Let me see if that works. It's not helping me very much. I'll go to 100%. Maybe that will be better. No. This is it. Oh, it did it. Good. So now I could do that, but I want to put it to, I'm not putting it into the right category, but that is what you would do. And then you start, yeah. So let's move to the next one. Let's now see if the historical associations will help us. Fremitus, or I don't know how you say that. And now you can see I clicked that exclamation mark, and now I got all of these. And this is because if you go into the browser and look up this inactive concept, let me just do that. Do we have time for that? Okay, so let us just try and do that. Maybe we have time. if it loads. Okay, it doesn't. This is so weird. The Wi-Fi is not helping us either. Okay, but then I would suggest that if you're looking into this, or if you're at home right now, if you go into the browser and search for inactive concepts and for this Fremitus, and then you go into the RefSet tab, you can see all the different replacements. So Fremitus apparently was an ambiguous concept. There are different kinds, and you'll see these possibly equivalent to associations go to these concepts that you now see down here. So the things that you see down here are all active. So I'll delete that one. We don't want that anymore. But maybe we'll say, well, I want to map to, I don't know why this is not working now. I want to put this one, and these are narrower. I want to put this into narrower. Then you can juggle these around, and those that you weren't interested in, you could delete. And this is also something, it's because it's really loading slow. I can see it's unable to save. It's really because there's some loading issue here. But one point that is important to make that I didn't make before is that I showed you how you can select one target, but actually you can also select many targets. So for one concept, you can add many. So if you have one narrow or two broads, you can do that, or two inexacts. That's perfectly fine. You can do that, and you'll just see 2 rows appearing. So it doesn't restrict you to the number of targets that you want. So for example, if you were mapping a drop-down list, but now in the new version, you want to allow some more concepts to support that more granular data entry, you may want to say, well, this code can actually be both this or this or this. And then you allow those 3 SNOMED concepts to be results of the map. So that is what, if we were allowing these 2, we'll just say, okay, I want to keep these 2. And then let's go out and see, I'll just show you the next one, drug abuse. We would do the same for this. And you can see for the drug abuse, there are now 2 replacements. And maybe I wanted to, I wanted to keep both of them. Let us go out and see how it looks in the map. So Fremitus, your local code, D14, now has 2 rows. It includes both the tossive Fremitus and the vocal Fremitus. And that will mean that your new drop-down list will have more items, right? Or your new SNOMEDified value set will have more items than the original one. But that may be perfectly fine for your use case. Yeah, so now you can also see that these exclamation marks have been, or these tags have been removed. And this is really how you do the update, that you go through, resolve each of these, have another person review them, and then following the same process as I just showed you before. And then you can be sure that your map is now up to date. And then you can export it and use it. Wasn't that it? So while I have the system up here, is there something you need me to re-show you, or do you have any questions to the tool while we have it up? Yeah.
Just clarify, is this something that's available in SNOMED, or is it a third party?
This is developed by CSIRO, who's also out there, but it's SNOMED service, so it's our tool. It's free for everyone to use. If you don't see it, then request access through your SNOMED account. We welcome everyone to use it. And if you have questions about the use of it, reach out to either myself or Kath or any other SNOMED staff, and they will point you in the direction of someone who can help you. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, I want my colleagues to see this, or then also reach out to us in the implementation team. We are happy to meet with you and talk about your use case and show you how you can apply this tool in your project. We're very happy to do that as well. That goes for you out there online as well. So don't hesitate to ask us or reach out. That's what we are here for.
Is there a plan to map from a local extension to SNOMED? Because we have a project where we have to do both. So we want to use this can we do
The opposite. So the question here is about, will there be an option to map in the other direction? And that has, you're not the only one. And whether it will be part of the Snap to SNOMED tool or whether it will be something else, I can't tell you, but I know that it's in our strategy at SNOMED International to look into how we can support maps in the other direction. So where the point of departure is SNOMED, and you may map to like a reporting coding system or something else. Yeah, so I can't promise you that we'll have this tomorrow, but I promise you that it's something that's in our pipeline. Yeah. 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 The question here is about the search, the automap feature, how that works, what is the kind of search that is done. I'm repeating because there are people online. And you're right, it's a pure, and that's why that pre-processing of the terms, why we have emphasized that so much, because it is just looking into, is there a term that matches it? And that also means that if you have a SNOMED edition with not that many synonyms, as we have in Denmark, where we only have one Danish term, it's really, the automap feature doesn't work that well as if I was in an English speaking countries where there are many synonyms. So this is also where one of the options, if it was me, I would actually translate my Danish terms to an English term, because then I would have a greater likelihood to use this. But it depends on the project and the edition that you're working with and so forth. But there are different options. And we have certainly been thinking about ways that you could use, you could update this and to make it even more clever, but not something that is in the pipeline to be implemented. Other questions on this? No? Okay, I'll hand over to Kath again to wrap up, right?
Yeah, we'll wrap up quickly because I know Anna's got another session to get to. So this is basically just the considerations and key messages from this mapping tutorial, really. And I think the first question is map needed? So I think we talk about sort of what are your reasons for doing it? Is it business requirements? Are they fully understood of why you need a map? Are there other options to maps? That's one of the other things. Like recently, there's been developments in terms of like the Højen ontology that's gone down the route of creating an extension. So it's often thinking about what are the other options available, and what are the clinical risks as well. So like we've talked about with the different maps, like is it broad to narrow and things like that. What are the clinical risks to your patients that might be involved if you're creating a map? And what is the data quality and compatibility of code systems? So it's always one of those things of what's your original code system like? What's the quality? Because we always say rubbish data in, you don't get great data out. It's the same with maps. You want to make sure that works, and also that the code systems you're trying to map do actually match enough to align what you're creating. And then also, what resources have you got available as well? That's often a key thing. What's the cost? What's the quality assurance? And are you going to be able to maintain the map that you're creating? So these are the key things that we always just want to highlight. Loss of meaning during mapping, which way are you going? Is that clinical meaning still the same thing and going to make the difference to patient care? So that the maps are clear. What is the map for? Is it for reimbursement or clinical care? So it's really defining that purpose. And then can you keep the map up to date? For me, that's a key thing, is that it's great to create it once, but because terminology and everything changes, you want to be able to keep that map up to date. And the direction of the map can it only be used in one way, a really key thing to think about. And I think that's where your thoughts come in of which way can you go? What are the developments coming that you can go from SNOMED or to SNOMED? And best practice principles, so define the purpose of your map. Use standardized maps where you can. So there have a lot of maps being created that use a standardized process in place. Keep them versioned and auditable, and where possible, engage clinical experts to review any complex maps that you've got. We know that's not always possible, and they're made in other areas, but sometimes having that clinical input into those maps of what's being developed is key. And this was something that we've got in terms of linking code systems through SNOMED CT. So this is a great little thing that you can actually have a look at on the implementation portal. And if you search for a concept in there, like fatigue or something, it will highlight either if it's used in a map, if it's used in content, if it's used in an alternative extension and RevSet. And this is really showing that it's sort of a central hub for being able to exchange that clinical data there. Sorry, I'm really rushing through these because I know we're close to time. But I think that is it. So if anybody's got any questions at all, please let us know. Well, thank you for your time. That's same for online. We'll keep an eye out there too.